अभी बाद में इसको बांटिएगा, हाँ प्लीज रखिए, रख दीजिए, कुछ रख दो, बैठ जाओ। To brief us more on the key highlights of economic survey, we have with us Chief Economic Advisor Shri V. Anant Nageshwaran ji. My warm welcome to you, sir. I welcome Senior Economic Advisor Ms. Chandni Raina, Economic Advisor Shri Chanchal C. Sarkar, Economic Advisor Dr. Anuradha Guru, and Economic Advisor Dr. Rosemary Abraham. Welcome to all of you. Today's press conference will go as follows. First, the Chief Economic Advisor will give a presentation on the key narratives from the Economic Survey 25-26, followed by a question and answer session. Over to Chief Economic Advisor, sir.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and my colleagues, friends. It's a pleasure to stand in front of you and present the Economic Survey for 25-26 again. And wish you all a very happy and healthy 2026. We have 11 more months to go. So may the year be blessed with happiness and good health for all of you. This Economic Survey's cover actually symbolizes the key message that we have on the importance of manufacturing and exports for India's future growth in a very fragmented world and a fractious global environment. The survey takes you through 5 parts, the presentation as well, our current economic performance, and what are our priorities for the next 25 years, and how are we going to pursue them in the global context, which is somewhat unpredictable and even dangerous. And therefore, what kind of preparation as a country, as a society, we need to make to be able to achieve our priorities in a difficult global environment. And then we conclude. First, India is an indeed oasis of macro stability in otherwise a turbulent world. Numbers speak for themselves. Our GDP for this financial year is estimated, this is all IMF forecast, may differ slightly from what MOSPI has told us. IMF predicts 7.3% for the year ending March 2026. We have 7.4 from MOSPI. And the fund forecasts 6.4% for the next 2 years, 26-27 and 27-28. You will hear our numbers later. But the important thing is whether it is for the current financial year or the future, our India's growth numbers stand out in comparison to any other part of the world. And that is why we call India a oasis of economic performance in the global scenario. And if you look at the last few years in comparison to pre-COVID average, real GDP growth pre-COVID was 6.4%, and in FY25 was 6.5%, and this year, as I said, MOSPI is predicting 7.4%. Private final consumption expenditure growth is 7% for this year, on top of 7.2% last year. And in real terms, gross fixed capital formation is going to be a lot better than FY25 and definitely much better than the banking and corporate balance sheet crisis-ridden 2012-2020 period when it grew only 6.3% on average per annum. More importantly, we are achieving these high growth rates, consumption and investment spending amidst very moderate inflation environment. This year, it is projected to be about 1.7% on average so far for the first 9 months of the year, largely due to a deflationary trend in food price index. However, it's important to note that core inflation is also well behaved. If you take out gold and silver, core inflation is 2.9, well below the 4% threshold with which the headline inflation is pursued by the central bank. So we basically have benign inflation trends, which we expect to see continue in the next financial year as well. In fact, beneath all the slides, you will see the chapters in which they are covered in great detail, and we will just give you a broad brushstroke of what those chapters are saying on those relevant topics. Moving on from GDP and inflation to public finances, in 21-22, the government said we would bring down the COVID year fiscal deficit to less than half, and we are about to deliver on that this year, with an estimated 4.4% of GDP as a union government fiscal deficit. More importantly, the primary deficit, which is revenue deficit minus interest payments, has come down from 5.7 and expected to be 0.8% this year. We achieved it through improvement in tax buoyancy, tax collections, while increasing and improving the quality of expenditure. Effective capex rate went up from 2.7 pre-COVID to 3.9% post-COVID as a percentage of GDP. And that is the reason why last year we got 3 credit rating upgrades, beginning with Morningstar DBRS in May, Standard & Poor's in August, R&I investment ratings from Japan in September. And so we now have BBB from S&P, BBB plus from the other two, and also India's CAD Edge also rates Indian sovereign rating at BBB plus. External sector, the forex reserves have more than doubled, compared to 11 years ago, from 341 billion to 701 billion. While much of it is due to lately the increase in gold valuations, definitely there is an increased accretion of foreign exchange currencies as well. Therefore, the import cover has picked up to nearly a year from 8.9 months in FY15. The current account balance is very well behaved, from 1.3% of GDP to now to about 0.8% in the first half of the current financial year. And external debt, which was 23.8%, is now down to 19.2%. So the external sector doesn't flash any warning signals as far as the macro picture is concerned. And if you look at the financial sector, we basically had the second decade of the millennium was marked by balance sheet troubles and repair. That is now showing up. The repair process is now well done, and the gross non-performing asset ratio is 2.2%. The net non-performing asset ratio is down from 6% in 2017-18 down to just 0.5%. But more importantly, the flow of resources to the non-government or the commercial sector, including households and businesses, and not just the credit market, but including the equity market, non-banking finance, etc. The annual growth rate in the last 5 years has been 29%. That is ample resource availability in the system for economic activity and investment spending. In the current financial year, the growth rate is 45% in the first 9 months compared to last year's 9 months. So overall, the resource availability augurs very well, and the resource mobilization as well for continued growth in investment spending and capital formation in the economy, and this is for the commercial sector, not government. Employment conditions have improved from the year when PLFS, the Periodic Labour Force Survey, was launched. 6% was the unemployment rate down to 3.2% in 23-24. The PLFS used to follow a July to June cycle, and that is now becoming a calendar year-based cycle. Therefore, the data for 2025 will be released sometime in March, and that is why we are showing you 23-24 data. Female labor force participation rate is up nearly 18 percentage points, and the unemployment rate in the first 9 months of the year has been steadily declining from 5.4 down to 4.9% in the last quarter. Now, in terms of other inclusive growth parameters, apart from the macro indicators, in rural development, 81% of rural households now have access to tap water. 2.9 crore houses have been constructed and 2.76 crore property cards issued under Swamitwa. When it comes to healthcare, 14.3 crores beneficiaries registered on the UWIN portal, 42.8 crore Ayushman Bharat cards issued, 1.8 plus lakh Ayushman Arogya Mandirs operational. And we include online gaming in this because it matters for mental health. So the banning of online gaming does matter for mental health and also for your wallet's health. So that is why we included the Online Gaming Act, Regulation Act of 2025 in this category. When it comes to education, there was a concern that post-COVID, because of the school shutdown for long periods, there would be a slippage in functional literacy and numerical skills, but the latest annual State of Education report does give us very encouraging signs. Reading skills in grade 3 up to grade 2 level has picked up by about 3 percentage points compared to what they were a decade ago, I'm sorry. And when it comes to numerical skills, the improvement is even more heartwarming, going from 25% to 33.7%. It is not to say that, therefore, nothing remains to be done. In fact, much remains to be done. But the direction of progress is quite reassuring. When it comes to enrollment, I think India has fixed that problem mostly. Now we are focusing on the quality of educational outcomes, because up to middle school level, enrollment is almost 100%. Up to high school, it's about 80%. And up to secondary school, it's about 60% or so. And in tertiary education, we have a target of 50%, and we are somewhere around 32%. So compared to where we were at the turn of the millennium in terms of enrollment, whether it is in school education or higher education, we have witnessed significant progress, so we can now focus more on educational outcomes. The number of educational institutions, whether it is universities, colleges, or medical seats, etc., all of them have expanded, so more details can be found in those chapters 11 to 13. Now, macro fundamentals, inclusive parameters are also backed up by digital and in terms of project execution. If you look at the project approvals by the PPP Appraisal Committee, which was barely less than 9,000 crores in FY23, now it's more than 1 lakh crores, and that too up to November only. The number of operational high-speed corridors in terms of length of kilometers in highways, just 550 kilometers, improved to 5,360 kilometers, and that too only up to December. The commissioning of railway networks from 1,500 to more than doubling to 3,100 plus. Port infrastructure having gone up in terms of cargo handled and the capacity of ports in terms of tonnage. The numbers speak for themselves. What is interesting to me when I was putting the survey together was the one on the bottom right. The growth of inland water transport as a very viable means of transporting people and goods. The growth rate of freight handled or goods handled by inland water transportation went from 18 million metric tons to 146 in the last 11 years, recording a compounded annual growth rate of 21%, and that's very impressive. So we are now tapping all sources of transportation mode to power economic activity in the country. Digital connectivity. India has a very steep decline in data costs compared to any other country in the world. Perhaps we are the cheapest, and of course I would consider it a mixed blessing in different ways, and you will see later why it's a mixed blessing. Number of broadband subscribers has gone up from 6 crores to 100 crores. And in terms of the Department of Telecom, in terms of deregulation processes, the application approval time for centralized right-of-way portals has come down by 90%, from 450 days to just 40 days. And in terms of rural connectivity, more than 13,000 towers operational, nearly 20,000 villages with 4G mobile, and 2.1 lakh gram panchayats connected with broadband. And therefore, given the good growth performance and the kind of foundation laid for sustained growth into the second half of this decade, we are now projecting FY27 growth at between 6.8 and 7.2%. So therefore, your midpoint is 7%, on top of the growth rates we have achieved post-COVID, with the most recent estimate being 7.4 for FY26. So in other words, we are projecting, notwithstanding the global situation, we are projecting on the back of domestic accomplishments and domestic reforms that the growth momentum is intact, and we will be able to grow at between 6.8 and 7.2% in real terms. We are aware that the base year revision will be announced in the end of February, and we are confident that we will be able to maintain this growth rate under the new base year and data from MOSPI. Now, having talked about the performance of the economy, which gives us a very strong foundation, we go to the part 2 of this presentation. We look at the issues of long-term importance to the Indian economy, which are covered in detail in the economic survey. First, the outcome of rising global uncertainty for the country is the effect on the capital account and therefore on the currency. As an emerging market and a capital importing country, developments in India's external account reflects the impact of the rise in global uncertainty. India's gross FDI has been growing very well. In FY26, gross FDI is at least 10% higher than last year, but net FDI has been on the weaker side, partly because of profit-taking by investors who have invested in the earlier decades, and also because of the compulsion that Indian businesses face to invest overseas. So ODI by Indian businesses has also increased. So as a result, net FDI numbers are not where we would like them to be, although they are not alarming. Portfolio investors have various reasons. One is the valuation and the lack of a so-called AI story in India, and also the overall uncertainty caused by the tariff situation is holding them back from committing more money into the Indian market. But as a contrarian, when sentiment towards India is actually on the weaker side, that is when the future prospective returns will look the brightest, actually. And if you look at the currency, therefore, as a country that depends on imported capital to meet a current account deficit, even though the deficit itself is on the lower side, if capital flows become weaker, naturally the currency reflects that. And that is what we have seen in the last 1 year, with the rupee weakening against the dollar by about 6 to 7%. This is in spite of the stellar economic fundamentals we have. So it has got nothing to do with the macro picture. It is simply accounting that if you are a current account deficit country, you need to import capital. And when capital flows become weaker due to global factors, remember, in the second decade, interest rates were close to zero in the developed world. They are now between 4 and 5% as well. So the opportunity cost of investing overseas is higher. So that is what shows up in the currency, and it is not a reflection of the macroeconomic fundamentals. The second issue that we need to tackle is long-term fiscal sustainability will require consistency in center's efforts, which we have seen demonstrated in the last 5 years, and also prudence and commitment on the part of the states. The Centre's Special Assistance Scheme for Capital Investments has incentivized states, without which their capex would be lower, and with that it is 2.4% of GDP, and the fiscal deficit, including SASCI funds, it's 3.2, and without that it's 2.8, well contained without SASCI. But overall, the goal is to bring down the ultimate combined fiscal deficit in the medium to long term to 6% of GDP. The unconditional fiscal transfers that many states are pursuing today do have a very useful short-term role. They put cash in the hands of the public, raises disposable income, and increases spending power, no doubt. However, sustaining growth will require a careful reprioritization so that short-term income support doesn't erode the very investments on which inclusive medium-term prosperity ultimately rests. This is a quote directly from the chapter. And therefore, any fiscal indiscipline at the state level is also lately casting a shadow on the sovereign borrowing cost. The 10-year bond yield is 6.7%, and a similarly rated Indonesian 10-year bond yield is 6.3%. And therefore, since India has gotten into the bond indices globally, those investors look at the general government deficit and not just the union government deficit. That is why I think it's important that states also begin to walk on the path of fiscal prudence and consolidation in the years to come. The other priority is agriculture. In fact, in the global environment that we are getting into, all three engines of the economy, agriculture, manufacturing, services, have to fire together. And they are doing that in allied areas. Livestock and fishing and agriculture have grown at more than 6 and 7% in the last 5 years. Traditional crops can match them. If they do so, agricultural GVA will be much faster than what we are experiencing, around 3 to 4% today. And the chapter goes into what are the various steps we can take, starting from rebalancing the fertilizer consumption, looking at rice and wheat procurement to encourage crop diversification for the sake of nutrition, for the sake of soil fertility, for the sake of water tables, etc., we can take a look at how we can, through policies, encourage crop diversification. So these are all the important issues we need to address to get the overall gross value addition up in agricultural sector. From agriculture, naturally, we move on to food. And this is from the National Family Health Survey 4. The 5 will be released soon, I think. But the important thing is, Indian obesity is a major issue for reaping the demographic dividend. Physical health, mental health, emotional health, all 3 factors are necessary apart from skilling and education for the country to be able to reap the demographic dividend. So this economic survey, while in the last 2 surveys we have focused much more on mental health, this time we also focus on the physical health aspect. And one early and easy step that the private sector can take is to allow food labeling to reflect the risks of what people are consuming. So compared to other countries in the region and globally, Indian food labeling can improve so that people can make conscious choices in what they eat, etc. And therefore, obesity is an important factor, and it will not be addressed only by government efforts. It requires citizens' consciousness and private sector cooperation as well. So when I spoke about the data cost being the lowest in the world, I said it's a mixed blessing, and here it is why. Compulsive scrolling and social comparison is linked to anxiety and depressive symptoms, and we have been covering it in the previous 2 economic surveys, and we continue to do so. But we are very happy to note that Andhra Pradesh government is contemplating restricting social media for children under 16, so is the Goan government, etc. But it is again a matter of policy and conscious choices to be made by citizens themselves, because exposure to screen time, sedentary lifestyle, ultra-processed food consumption increase the risk of anxiety and suicidal thoughts significantly among our adolescents and also in the people in the early working age population as well. And this is a silent scourge, and we need to fix that if we are going to achieve our long-term growth aspirations. Education and skilling is slightly more familiar turf for all of us, but even here the news is encouraging. A lot of us are concerned about how we will fare in the AI era. The good news is that employers actually still value soft skills, engagement, self-efficacy, working with others, adaptability, and management skills matter a lot more than technological skills. But it's important, therefore, also to prepare our youth to look at areas which are not necessarily university education driven, but could be vocational and professional skills. In other words, we have to make vocational and technical and professional skills more fashionable and respectable than we have been doing so far. And this too is a combined initiative of the industry, the private sector, households, and the government, and not just a policy matter alone. If you look at the areas which are immune to AI diffusion, these are elder care and nursing, culinary arts, advanced tool and die specialization, early special needs education, public health outreach, environmental restoration. All of them can be pursued in areas because we have shortage of skilled personnel in these areas, and they're also resistant to the diffusion of AI in terms of future employment and income earning prospects. The last economic survey had a special chapter on AI, and this survey continues that. And the issues are with respect to the following that this chapter covers: the data center resource consumption, whether it is power or water or land, the kind of financial requirements for the large language models in the current ecosystem in the Western world, and data localization for domestic value creation, of course, the macro question of mitigating the labor market impact, navigating geopolitical constraints to hardware access, including chips, and importantly, from a geopolitical security and dependability perspective, can we continue to depend on foreign models for use in public administration and critical sectors? Of course, the government is already making its position very clear. We are going to be looking at developing local models, which are underway actually, and some of it may be rolled out in the course of the AI summit next month. But these are the various trade-offs that this chapter 14 tackles. Now, This is another issue which we have been flagging in the last few economic surveys. India is committed to net zero by 2070. And India is one of the better performing countries in terms of installation of solar and wind power in the world. At the same time, if we have to become more pervasive as a share of overall energy generation, if renewable energy were to become a significant part of the energy picture, we need to understand the ramifications. The amount of material required and the energy required to therefore generate renewable energy should not be underestimated. We should go into it with open eyes, and that is what this screen shows you. It is self-explanatory. Therefore, this chapter, like in the previous occasions, does focus on adaptation, demand management, and also this time we are happy to share with you in chapter 10 the kind of environmental regulations that have been liberalized and made easier in terms of compliance, etc., compared to the past. And that is a very positive story that is also captured in chapter 10. The special essay this time is on urbanization, apart from the sequel to AI. In Indian cities, we face a multiplicity of challenges. One is the low floor space index and floor area ratio. Mobility is a challenge because last mile connectivity is still missing, although metro rail network has expanded significantly in the last 10 to 11 years. Solid waste management and waste disposal are still important issues with growing population and growing cities, and governance is dispersed among multiple agencies. But looking at this chapter, if you read it carefully, you will understand that getting urbanization right is not just, once again, as in the case of healthy food consumption or social media usage, is not just a matter of getting policy right. Citizens have an important role to play. We behave very differently in metro stations, and we behave very differently above the surface. And why is that case? Why is it so? Our behavior in the metro is absolutely impeccable, but not so above the ground. So, why does it happen, and what can be done to make sure that there is no difference in the way citizens respond to metro rail as well as public transportation or road discipline? How is it possible, and what kind of behavioral dynamics are at work here, and how can the state facilitate and nudge the citizens to do so? These kinds of interesting issues are explored in chapter 15, along with a discussion of some specific experiments going on in different parts of the country, which actually point the way forward for the rest of the country as well. Now, moving on to part 3, I would like to compliment Business Standard for this wonderful line, which I use. India's growth story sits at the intersection of global headwinds and domestic potential. Exactly, well captured. So far, we have seen the domestic potential and priorities. We are going to now see the global headwinds. What is unfolding in the world today and why? If you look at the 5 bright pink boxes, this fund manager has predicted it in 2020 that the world will face populism, trade wars, financial repression, military conflicts, and negative real yields. And he doesn't trace this to specific personalities. He traces it to the kind of policies we adopted since the global financial crisis and the quantitative easing and ultra-low interest rate policy that was set in motion in 2008. So in other words, personalities are not the reason why the world is today looking at trade wars, military conflicts, and populism with negative real yields and financial repression to follow. These are products of choices that were made some 15 to 18 years ago, and therefore the train has already left the station with respect to these consequences, and they will be with us for the next 5 to 10 years as well. And that is something we need to take as given when we look at our own policy options and priorities. Therefore, geopolitical tensions are inevitable, and they have led to decadal level highs in global economic uncertainty. The uncertainty index reached historic highs when the reciprocal tariffs were announced, but still they are much higher compared to where they were at the turn of the millennium. And reflecting that is the price of gold, which goes up by more than $100 to $200 per ounce every day. So in other words, gold is not only responding to global uncertainty, but also the question marks arising with respect to the store of value of fiat currencies around the world. So therefore, what is going to become in this era of easy money? The problem is this era of easy money, which was there from 2008 onwards, which also resulted in high inflation in 2022 and 23, has resulted in a very expensive stock market, almost reaching the highs before the tech bubble burst in March 2000. Concentration risk even more than what we saw earlier in terms of few companies having a very high market cap, and financing of the global financial capital coming from non-banking sources rather than from banking sources which are better regulated. And if you look at the circular financing that characterizes many of the AI-related investments, you will understand that this can be a sort of a trigger to unravel the global finances. Therefore, we look at three possible scenarios for 2026 and maybe somewhere in 2027. It's very difficult to be precise about the timing. Scenario one, business as usual in 2025, continuing this year, but with less security and more fragility, and we attach a 40 to 45% probability to that. It is disorder, but managed disorder. Scenario two is a worse version of scenario one, and that will result in sharper trade-off for emerging economies, including India, between autonomy, growth, and stability, and supply chains will become even more politicized. Scenario three is the worst of them. It's a systemic shock cascade. Leverage AI infrastructure, which we spoke about earlier, will expose fragile business models. Financial, technological, and geopolitical shocks amplify each other and feed into each other. And this low probability but high impact outcome will have macro risks even exceeding those that we saw in the wake of 2008. This is the kind of world scenario that we are facing. Therefore, given this world scenario, but given our stellar domestic growth performance and prospects and priorities, how do we therefore prepare ourselves to drive our development Viksit Bharat agenda, and that is section 4. Why Swadeshi matters? Because the nature of the global system has changed. Trade is no longer reciprocal. Markets are no longer neutral, and supply chains have become instruments of state power, and we have seen them in several examples across the world. And therefore, Swadeshi is a legitimate policy instrument in such a world. Countries have to take care of their priorities, and therefore we should not be squeamish about swearing by Swadeshi in this kind of global environment. The conundrums, however, emerging markets face is this. There is going to be a resource crunch, which is reflected in the price of copper. And in the last 1 week, even crude oil prices have begun to firm. So we need to create buffers, whether it is fertilizer, base metals, crude oil, pharmaceutical ingredients. We need to have buffers because supply chains can be disrupted at any point in time, as we saw in the 3 global scenarios. And the other thing, apart from building up buffers, which we need to import in many cases, we also have to appreciate that as the economy grows, per capita income rises, imports will inevitably rise. This is a given. This chart here shows you China's per capita income growth going from nothing to $12,000 in the last 50 years or so. Simultaneously, imports have grown. We look at China as a major exporting power, that is true, but it also imports a lot, 3.3 trillion, including services. So similarly, India going from $2,500 per capita to $20,000 per capita in the next 25 years will also see its imports rise. Therefore, means we have to export or attract capital to pay for it. That's also inevitable. No matter how successful we are with indigenization, this is something that economic history tells us is inevitable. And therefore, currency depreciation that we are witnessing today isn't something unique to India. Countries which have a current account deficit have seen their currencies depreciate. If you look at the performance of currencies since the millennium began, the Indian rupee actually has done quite well. And the performance even since COVID, India is in the same ballpark, not an outlier. So we need to get the breathless headlines about the Indian rupee into perspective. Therefore, at the same time, since we have aspirations to become a major global player, and naturally currency strength and stability is associated with economic rise. But how do we get there? And that is where this survey focuses on, saying that manufacturing strength is a precondition for achieving currency stability and strength. A strong growth in manufacturing exports leads to improved current accounts position, leads to forex reserve accumulation, and therefore gradual strengthening of currency credibility. If you look at today's countries, which are synonymous with stable currency, Switzerland, Germany before the euro happened, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, all of them have a significant manufacturing presence. So achieving manufacturing competitiveness and merchandise goods export growth is critical to to pursue the goal of currency stability and strength. Similarly, the other advantage of doing manufacturing and manufacturing exports is that will pave the way for lower cost of capital. We see a lot of articles in the media and commentary that India's cost of capital is high, it has to come down, and financial deepening is the answer. No, financial deepening is secondary or auxiliary to achieving cost of capital compared to manufacturing and export surplus. And we have discussed and provided the empirical basis for this in the chapter 3. Productivity-led manufacturing expansion leads to sustained export growth. That in turn turns the current account deficit into a surplus. Currency stability occurs. That lowers the exchange rate depreciation risk premium, leading to a durable decline in capital cost, which further drives manufacturing growth. That is how the virtuous circle gets formed, and therefore financial deepening matters, but not as much as manufacturing exports matters for sustainably lowering the cost of capital. You can read the analysis in chapter 3. Now, these three elements, indigenization, leading to strategic resilience and strategic indispensability, are the three pillars of investment in national strength. So we have to indigenize, there is no doubt, Swadeshi matters, but we have to move on from that to strategic resilience, being able to withstand external shocks, and third, making India irreplaceable in key global value chains. In other words, we have to start with making things at home competitively. In August 2025, in his Independence Day speech, the Honorable Prime Minister said, "Dam kam and dam zyada." In one sentence, he actually has captured the essence of export competitiveness: good quality at affordable prices. So can we make things at home competitively? Second step to that is progress from there to strategic resilience. Can we keep functioning if the world breaks down? That is resilience. And the third step in the process is, can the world keep functioning if we break down? If the answer is no, then we have become strategically indispensable. And that is the goal we should be looking at in the current geopolitical and geostrategic compulsions that we are facing. Therefore, what should the state do to achieve strategic indispensability? What should the governments do in the country, union and states? Pursue Swadeshi ecosystem first reforms, deregulation, whole of government approach, manufacturing cluster-led growth, input cost reduction. It is not just removal of inversion of custom duties, but also eliminating cross-subsidization with respect to freight and power cost, etc. Boosting competitiveness, world-class and reliable infrastructure, long-term policy stability, building the talent ecosystem, and more importantly, when we give protection to our industry from import competition, we have to link it to productivity and export performance. That is what Northeast Asia did better than any other country in the world. So in other words, what Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Japan did was to support their domestic industry, but in return, demand productivity and export performance and measuring up to global competition within a limited period of time. So protection cannot be in perpetuity, and it should be in return for productivity and export performance. To be able to do the first two, We need an entrepreneurial state, to borrow the phrase from Professor Mariana Mazzucato. We need an entrepreneurial state. What does it mean? A mindset that encourages risk-taking, accepts failures, and puts outcomes ahead of processes. The bureaucracy in the country has to move from colonial-era mindset of extraction to one of development orientation. The good news is that we have enough examples from within our own system of being able to achieve number 3. And this is what happened in the software sector in India. The general perception is that the software sector grew on its own, that nothing could be farther from the truth. If you look at the chapter 16, we provide the description based on a case study done in Stanford, that in the software sector, the Indian bureaucracy moved from produce and protect to broad-based industry promotion by mid-80s, and they did so by the following steps: recognizing software as an industry, easing forex and import restrictions, investing in technical education and telecommunication, including liberalizing satellite communication links, etc., creating technology parks, and exercise regulatory flexibility. The Electronic Secretary Seshagiri Rao is quoted in this case study saying, "We broke as many rules as we created new rules." And that is basically exactly entrepreneurial mindset. So the Indian software sector success story owes a lot to an entrepreneurial state, actually. And the state capacity works best, therefore, when it is directed towards facilitation and coordination and provision of public goods. You can read more about it in chapter 16, part 2. And this mindset is not just something historically done in the 80s. In the last 1 year, union and state governments have also been building on this track record of entrepreneurial state. In the last 1 year alone, starting from the budget of February 2025, we have seen simplification of Income Tax Act, GST 2.0 with the lower, better processes and 2 simple slabs, and higher direct tax exemptions and slabs, relaxation and suspension of quality control orders, which exerted a lot of adverse pressure on small and medium enterprises, replacement of Manrega, plugging leakages with GRAM-G, notification of labor codes, and the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways shifting from L1 basis to a technical score-based basis for choosing consultants to prepare detailed project reports. This is a very important step. It's a process reform that will percolate down to other ministries as well. On the trade, investment, and sustainability side, we have the Export Promotion Mission, the District Business Reform Action Plan, which we covered in the last economic survey. It does lead to higher gross value added. Whichever states are advancing in BRAP, they are seeing a better growth in gross value addition. We have seen a plethora of trade deals in the last 12 to 18 months, the most recent one being with the European Union, and they definitely offer geographical diversification for Indian exporters. Liberalization of environmental rules in accordance with the pollution intensity of the industry, which is a very pragmatic approach by the Ministry of Environment and Forest. Full FDI in insurance and nuclear power generation. The creation of budget-financed Anusandhan National Research Fund and the Research and Development Innovation Fund to the tune of 1.5 lakh crores over 5 years. And more gratifyingly, in the power sector, we now have DISCOMs turning into profits because of automatic pass-through of fuel cost, smart metering, and a revamped distribution sector scheme which allows financing based on improved performance in terms of reducing T&D losses, etc. Now, what you see in this slide is not just headline or front page reforms, but also process reforms. And that is what gives us confidence that the state is on its way to becoming entrepreneurial. Now, last economic survey focused on deregulation, getting out of the way. And this economic survey shares with you very happily the scorecard of the Indian states in this. The economic survey identified 23 areas where states could deregulate, simplify, eliminate, consolidate regulations. 23 into 36 gives you 828 areas collectively for states to look at. And the progress report is exceedingly good, probably A+ grade. 86% of these 828 priorities across 36 states and union territories put together have already been implemented or under implementation. Only 14% are not applicable. So in other words, states have taken up deregulation in the following areas: land, building and construction, labor, utilities and permissions, and general priorities very enthusiastically, so much so that they are now embarking on phase 2 of deregulation as well. So this is a very tangible and concrete example of the Indian state moving into problem-solving, process reform, entrepreneurial mode from a procedure-led mode. And in a nutshell, this is what gives national power. The index of national power is a combination of productive force, institutional quality, and strategic concentration. Productive force illustrated by infrastructure, manufacturing, skilled labor force. Institutional quality, basically the legislature, the judiciary, the media, and regulatory bodies. Strategic concentration in terms of core areas where we need to prioritize in terms of indigenization and Swadeshi, etc. If we are able to get all these three balance right, then we will rank very high in the index of national power. This is the equation of national power. According to a speech given by Dr. Rajan in 2005 in the Nani Palkiwala Memorial Lecture, apparently Mr. Palkiwala said, "We are not poor by nature. We are poor by policy." Dr. Rajan concluded his speech by saying, one day we will be able to say, we are not rich by nature, we are rich by policy. I think we are almost there at this point where we can say we are not rich by nature, but rich by policy. This gives us the confidence to be able to share something optimistic with you. 3 years ago, we wrote in the economic survey that the maximum potential growth of the Indian economy was 6.5%, and with reforms, it could rise to between 7 and 8% per annum in the medium term. On the back of the evidence I have shared with you in the last 40 minutes in terms of actual performance, creation of public investments, the good health of the financial sector, enthusiastic uptake of state-level deregulation, and both process and policy reforms at the union government, this economic survey, despite the geopolitical environment being what it is confidently upgrading India's potential growth to 7% per annum from 6.5% 3 years ago. And Chapter 1 gives you details on how we managed to arrive at this positive conclusion on the back of the track record that the Indian economy and policy makers have been able to display post-COVID in particular. So India's potential growth is 7%, and that is why you saw that our GDP projection for 26-27 is between 6.8 and 7.2%. Of course, subject to geopolitical risk factors, commodity prices, etc., all of them can derail the calculations on a short-term basis. But on a sustained medium-term trend growth for the Indian economy, we believe now it is 7%. If we are able to achieve manufacturing and export competitiveness and pursue further process reforms in the areas of land and cross-subsidization and bring down the cost of manufacturing, this 7% can even rise to 7.5% and 8% in the next few years as well. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, we have done well. As they say in German, wir haben gut gemacht. We are doing better post-COVID. But the world is more predictable and dangerous. We acknowledge that. We have promises to keep and miles to go before we can sleep. We have to reimagine the way we are organized as a state and reimagine the way we function as well. And that applies to the government, the private sector, and households. Businesses and households have to internalize their responsibilities. As a society, we have to embrace delayed gratification. Then we will become strategically indispensable. The late Sir Mark Tully said, "I am an optimist because I have seen the Indian people do the impossible every single day." We concur with him, and as a mark of respect to him, we feel the Indian people will do the impossible every single day in the next 25 years on our way to Viksit Bharat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for a very nice presentation. Now, floor is open for question and answer. Before I start, I would request you two things. First of all, please identify yourself and your organization's name. And second, please listen carefully so that repeat questions should not be asked. So I'll start with 234 first.
सर तरुण शर्मा फ्रॉम जी बिजनेस। सर मैं सवाल हिंदी में पूछना चाहूँगा। आपने बहुत अच्छी प्रेजेंटेशन बनाई है और बहुत ही रियलिस्टिक प्रेजेंटेशन है इस बार। लेकिन सर एक चीज़ जो मुझे लग रहा है कि मिस हो गई, पोल्यूशन। सर आपने पोल्यूशन को एक बड़ा फैक्टर इसमें नहीं माना। क्या बड़ी वजह रही सर कि आपने अर्बनाइजेशन की बात करी, मेंटल हेल्थ की बात करी, लेकिन पोल्यूशन को टच नहीं किया? थैंक यू।
एनवायरनमेंट इश्यूज को हमने काफ़ी डिटेल में डिस्कस किया है चैप्टर 10 में, जिसमें वी हैव आल्सो टॉक्ड अबाउट वेरियस एनवायरमेंटल रेगुलेशंस जिसमें चेंजेस हुए हैं टू एड्रेस पोल्यूशन इश्यूज. I think that should be able to, if you go through it, you would know that there has been a lot of changes that have been brought about in the past year, whether it is in the form of rationalization or it is in the form of creating transparency and predictability. Recently, there has also been the differentiated responsibility placed on polluting industries. So those that are more polluting need to have a higher green cover. Those that don't, they do not have that same mandate to do. Similarly, there has been a classification of polluting industries on the basis of red, blue, white, depending upon the level of emissions that they have. So work is ongoing, and that is reflected in the relevant chapter 10 on environment.
And also, just to add to what my colleague Chandini said, we have looked at the pollution issue in the chapter on urbanization as well. So you will see more details there. Thank you.
9.
सर मैं राजीव हूँ दैनिक जागरण अखबार से। सर मेरा सवाल है कि ये जो ग्रोथ रेट आप करंट फाइनेंशियल ईयर के लिए 7% है और नेक्स्ट के लिए 6.8 to 7.2% आपने प्रोजेक्ट किया है, तो मतलब क्या इस रेट से हम लोग 2047 तक विकसित भारत बन जाएंगे? क्योंकि पहले जो अनुमान लगाया जा रहा था वो मोर देन 8% का हमेशा अनुमान लगाया गया है। तो एक तो सवाल ये है मेरा। दूसरा सर कि आपने स्टेट जो है, स्टेट के लिए कहा है कि पॉलिसी उनको ही बनानी होगी और वो केंद्र के साथ मिलकर जो है पॉलिसी बनाए, लेकिन स्टेट जो फ्रीवीज को लेकर इतना कुछ हो रहा है और हम तो उसको लेकर उनके पास पैसा ही नहीं बच रहा है, तो कहाँ से वो विकास कर पाएंगे? तो इस दोनों सवाल पे क्या कहना आपका?
So the second question is something that we covered not only in the presentation, but it's also discussed in some detail in the chapter on fiscal affairs, which is chapter 3, if I'm not mistaken. Chapter 2. So you will see a discussion on it, on the unconditional transfers. So far, the high nominal GDP growth, GSDP growth in states has provided enough cover for these transfers to happen, which is why the overall fiscal deficit of states is still 2.8% if you do not include the SASCI loans. So it has not had an impact on the fiscal deficit, but naturally some of it has come at the expense of capital expenditure on the part of states. But that is why we have flagged this issue. So I mentioned this in the presentation as well. Now, as far as the growth rate that is needed, that mention of 8% is in dollar terms. So if you are able to grow sustainably at 7% on average, there could be a given year in which it is higher, or another year it could be lower, etc. In real terms, in Indian rupee, then if you were to add the inflation rate that will be experienced in the United States, for example, minus the inflation rate in India, that is what will give you the dollar GDP growth rate. Historically, even in the last 40 years, India's dollar GDP growth has averaged about 8.7%. And therefore, and that has, even in this period, we have gone through a lot of global challenges, global crisis, etc. So a 7% real GDP growth is compatible with the 8+% dollar GDP growth, which is what will take us there. And more importantly, as time goes by, what constitutes Viksit Bharat is not a number in terms of per capita income or absolute GDP size. It's about whether the current generation feels that it is doing better than the previous generation, and whether they are very confident that their future generation will do better than them. That is a sign of development.
270.
सर मैं लक्ष्मण CNBC आवाज से इकोनॉमिक सर्वे में कहा गया है कि ongoing trade negotiations with United States are expected to conclude during the year, which could help reduce uncertainty on external front. मेरा दो क्वेश्चन है कि during the year means what? कैलेंडर ईयर या फाइनेंशियल ईयर? दूसरा क्वेश्चन, अगर यूएस के साथ ट्रेड डील हो जाती है तो जो जीडीपी ग्रोथ का हम लोग फॉरकास्ट किए हैं, क्या उससे और बेहतर होने की उम्मीद की जाएगी? और ट्रेड टैरिफ से कितना असर पड़ा है जीडीपी पे, कुछ कैलकुलेशन हुआ है?
So I don't have anything more to add to your first question. It is something that is better directed at the Ministry of Commerce. As far as the second question is concerned, we have taken that into consideration. When we projected 6.5% 3 years ago, we did so under the assumption that even at that point in time, we were realistic about the growth, export growth prospects, given the evolution of trade disputes. But now, we have been in the last few years signing a lot of free trade agreements, the most recent one being with the European Union. Of course, it will take a year or so to get ratified and then being effective. So therefore, the 7% growth rate doesn't necessarily depend to a large extent on the tariff situation resolution, because we don't know at this stage the timelines attached to it. But if it happens, it will definitely further bolster the chances of achieving 7% or even better. Do you have anything more to add, Rosemary? Okay.
11 number.
So Timsi Jaipuria this side from CNBC TV 18. So you've mentioned about the risk on job losses due to AI and AI adoption, and you've also spoken about reskilling. But you did not mention certain areas where these job losses have a future potential, in terms of which would be these areas where people can now reskill and look forward to as future areas where there can be employment.
I have to leave some work for you to do as well, in terms of reading the chapter.
76. Left side.
Sir, just a couple of questions. This is Vikas Doot from the Business Standard newspaper. Thank you for acknowledging that line from our paper. But I also want to say that it was a refreshing read, whatever I've been able to read so far of the survey. You, of course, invoked Joseph Heller, which I really liked. But you talked about the indiscriminate quality control orders that, we're now pushing back on, and some of the other reforms that the government has recently done. And which has, what you said is, added a sense of dynamism in the functioning of the government, which you expect will take us to the next level. Now, I wanted to get a sense from you on this issue that you flagged of the cost of capital. You said the rupee is punching below its weight for some reasons, but the concern comes for you from the investors, seeing the rupee's decline as a cause of concern. And you said that investor reluctance warrants attention. So I wanted to get a sense of whether you can elaborate a bit more on what kind of attention would we need to address this investor reluctance? And is it only about the rupee, or there's a broader concern that is driving investor reluctance? And secondly, I have a question on PPPs, but I will ask after this one.
So I did not use the word indiscriminate, by the way. It's your word, not mine.
Oh, so
I simply said quality controls orders have been revoked and suspended, And that's a good thing because the government revisits some of its own stance when the empirical experience is shows that the net costs are higher than the net benefits, etc. So that is exactly the point I made, nothing more, nothing less. And when it comes to investors, I have nothing more to add. I said valuation concerns, maybe the fact that India doesn't have an AI story, and uncertainties related to tariff might be holding investors back. But if you look at the flows of FIIs over the years, there have been times when they have come in and when they have been out for slightly longish period and we would like them to be, etc. So I also said usually when sentiment is weak, that is actually also a good contrarian indicator for the market to revive and for investors to come back. So there are both geopolitical factors. I alluded to the opportunity cost of sending money overseas, etc. So multiple factors. It's neither correct nor would it do justice to the issue to try and reduce it to just a couple of variables.
So second, just a quick question.
I think we should probably let others and then come back later.
Yes, one question is, I think you have to be considerate to others. So 54. This front.
Sir, this is Rishabh Bhatnagar with NDTV Profit. Firstly, sir, what is the sort of impact that you're seeing of the rebasing of the CPI when it comes to inflation assessment? And secondly, you point that private investment intentions are improving. What does it mean given the fact that there are certain penal tariffs still in place?
The new CPI would be released on 12th of February, so we would be knowing the numbers, but we are not expecting inflation to be a major concern at this point, given the drivers are, really benign at this point in time.
237.
The next question on private investment intentions, Dr. Shankar Sarkar will respond to you.
Yeah. Hello, sir.
Yeah.
My name is Suchandrima. I'm from INS. I have two questions. The first is, rupee has breached 92 level against US dollar today. So how do you look this situation and how can this be tackled? And my second question is on foreign investors are selling fast in India stock market since last year. So in this case, cause of serious concern, how can they be brought back into India?
So I think the answer to the rupee valuation is exactly what we discussed. So the long-term answer is manufacturing competitiveness, exports, and in the short run, some developments may not be in our control. But more importantly, the fact that the rupee is not reflecting the macro fundamentals and the sustained growth rate will definitely catch the attention of some investors, and that is when the tide will turn. And if you look at the rupee's performance, as I showed you, it isn't out of line with all other emerging market currencies have gone through and are going through at this point in time. It is a geopolitical risk, and that is what is reflected, not just in the Indian rupee, but elsewhere. That's why I wanted to put the Indian rupee's performance in the context of what's happening elsewhere. So the answer to your question lies in the fact that as the currency remains weak and fundamentals continue to display strength and solidity, investors will reappraise their stance towards the currency. And if we continue on the path of structural reforms, as we have been doing in the last 12 to 18 months, both in the union and state governments, then as Indian exports show resilience and even growth, that will also further consolidate the revised perceptions on the Indian rupee going forward.
Two number. I think you lost.
Yeah. sorry. Thank you so much. So good afternoon, Sapna Das here from CNBC TV 18. So two quick ones. You explained a lot on the rupee and the commentary is also quite significant what you mentioned in the survey. But, given the fact that all these are reforms underway or need to be done, are being done, are in the process, in the pipeline, the fact remains that our real effective exchange rate has also come down substantially, over the last few days. So, in the near term, what's the outlook from the government side as far as the INR is concerned on that journey? Because there doesn't seem to be a stoppage at the moment in terms of the downward spiral for the reasons, that have been explained pretty well. So that's one. And so secondly, you have probably, kind of suggested or said that could consider the fact that without a complete privatization or without government losing control over CPSEs, maybe the stake can be cut to 26% in the PSUs. 26% without, by retaining the government company tag. And the other option is to continue with the coming below 51% via the OFS route without changing the company definition in the Companies Act. Something on those lines. Are we talking about a possible return to privatization agenda, which has not been spoken about in the last 3 odd years? It'd be nice if you could explain, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. On the second part of your query, Economic Survey has given an option to explore the possibility of monetizing on the government stake. It's not about completely lock, stock, barrel sale of the company. That is not what is written out there. What we have mentioned there is, in case of listed companies, only for listed companies, what we effectively need is 26% stake, which is the special resolution right stake. So for those listed companies, given the fact that almost in 30% of our listed companies, we have come below around 60% shareholding. So if you have to remain as a government company, by definition, government has to hold 51% stake. So in case government wants to keep these companies as government companies, what government could do is to amend the Companies Act and say that for listed companies, that threshold would be 26%. So they would remain as government companies. The other option is, if government wants to take a decision on privatization of these companies, then you can very well do that without amending the definition. So the moment you go below 51%, you become a non-government company by that clause. But this is only a suggestion that Economic Survey has given. Government could explore this at a later point in time in detail. The concerned department would be probably deeper. So they would look at it in depth and would examine this matter. This is only a suggestion at this point in time. Thank you.
Sapna, as for your first question, I think I've given enough answers already on the rupee, apart from what I have said. I don't think the government of India gives outlook for the rupee. We are not the private sector. And we reflect, the rupee reflects the market forces, and if at all, you may want to direct your question to Mint Street in Mumbai.
I would request only one question may be asked, and please don't repeat the same question. 81.
Hello, hi sir, Prakash Priyadarshi from ET Now. Economic Survey has in fact noted that the GST cuts have supported domestic consumption. What further measures would you suggest to boost consumption going forward?
Look, growth is the important driver of consumption, and the government has done few things. One is the reduction in the indirect tax rates and the widening of the slabs, the reduction in the GST rates, now the ensuring that both monetary and fiscal policy contributes to lower inflation, also puts purchasing power in the hands of people. These are all the various steps that the government has taken to raise disposable income and purchasing power, and that is why consumption growth is holding up at high levels. So a lot of these actions are feeding through or flowing through in terms of the disposable income and continued employment growth, and that is why the notification of labor codes and even the various deregulation exercises, to the extent that they boost economic activity, leading to employment generation, more income, and therefore more purchasing power and more consumption. That is how the economic cycle moves on.
25, gentlemen in the front.
I am Ravi Shankar Kapoor. I am a freelance journalist. My question is to Dr. Nageshwaran. Dr. Nageshwaran, you have mentioned, you emphasized manufacturing strength. Now, there was a national manufacturing policy in 2011, then Make in India 11 years back. So in this survey, what is it specific, which is different from recommendation, which have not been made so far? If you can put your finger on such a recommendation.
No, I mean, it's a good question, but sometimes we don't have to say anything new. Reinforcement and repetition are virtues in themselves. And more importantly, we do point out the importance of deregulation, input cost reduction, reduction in inversion, cluster-led growth, which is covered in the chapter on industry, and also the importance given to R&D and innovation through these are all the various factors that we are highlighting, whether they have been said before or not said before. You know, as Mark Twain once said, my best thoughts have been stolen by my ancestors. So there is no presumption on our part that we are coming up with a new source.
214, 214.
Sir, good afternoon. This is Surbhi from Business Today. Sir, I wanted to ask you a question around the gig economy. So the survey has spoken about the number of gig workers, and it's noted that the growth of gig workers outpaces overall employment. So, sir, I wanted your thoughts on whether you think that this is a matter of concern, because generally a regular wage employment is something which is seen as the most suitable thing. And secondly, while unemployment levels have gone down, they still do remain a matter of concern. So I wanted your thoughts on whether schemes like, you know, the ELI and PMIS, they've had the desired result. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So your first question on whether growing gig economy is a matter of concern is, I don't think so, because even the labor codes have now recognized gig workers. They have given a definition, and now they are going to be brought under social security norms. So the idea of the government is to treat them as on par with other workforce and provide them the necessary social security. And of course, when the labor code gets fully implemented, you will actually see a rise in their wages also. There will be stabilization. So there is no concern on that front as of now. And of course, a lot of measures are being taken towards employment generation. There is no dearth of schemes and measures that the government is taking, NCS, E-Shram, so and a lot of specific schemes. So I don't think there is any concern on, there is no dearth of action being taken on that front.
39. Left. We'll take everyone. Only 4 or 5 people have been left.
सर कृष्ण मोहन शर्मा भारत एक्सप्रेस से मेरा नागनाथन सर से सवाल है कि ग्रोइंग इंडिया एंड ग्रोन इंडियन, जो ओल्ड एज सिटीजन है उनका आने वाले समय में उनका रख रखाव उनका इलाज एक बहुत बड़ी समस्या होने वाली है सारे विकसित देशों में। उसकी तरफ हमारी सरकार की क्या योजना और किस तरीके से आगे बढ़ रही है?
So I think last year in the survey we had covered a lot about elder care also, and elder care being an economy of its own. And there is also a NITI Aayog report on how elder care can be taken care of and what all actions government can be taken and is also being taken. So I think action on that is ongoing.
280.
So good afternoon. So with what briefly I could read in the given time, this survey does flag US stablecoins as a risk to capital flow stability. From an India stance point of view, is there further on cryptocurrency or stablecoins that the survey mentions of? There hasn't been much since the FSB IMF report.
अपना परिचय भी दे दीजिए.
What is the actual operative part of your statement? What is the question?
Does the survey mention anything related to cryptocurrency or stablecoin?
Our position is very similar to what is being articulated by the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, that yes, I mean, and it is not just unique to India. First of all, the US dollar stable coins are still not operational yet. As and when it happens, we have to observe and see what kind of implications it has towards global capital flows, and also in terms of Indian-centric capital outflows or inflows, etc. So right now, there is nothing more to add to than what we have already said in the survey. And it is in congruence with what the Deputy Governor, Mr. Ravi Shankar, has been speaking about on this topic.
238.
So this is Priyansh from Money Control. I know you have spoken on the rupee, but it is a question on rupee again.
Sir, one part is that the survey says that the rupee adds to imported inflation. That's one risk. But it also says that it is, on a net basis, good for the merchandise trade balance. So it also is positive for that. So is there a level that you have in mind beyond which the effects would be negative for the economy?
I think it is difficult to put some numbers there. I think the paragraph that you're referring to is based on an econometric exercise we did. And it is a continuation of the exercise we wrote about in the last economic survey, where we looked at the aggregate trade deficit. And this time we broke it down into impact of the rupee on exports, imports, capital flows separately. A disaggregated analysis, which is a continuation of what we did in the previous economic survey. I would urge you to read it in full to be able to find the answers to your question.
24.
Hello, sir. Ruchika from Business Standard. First of all, congratulations for a very comprehensive and forward-looking survey. Sir, in context of what the survey talks about, the fiscal indiscipline at the state level casting a shadow on sovereign borrowing costs, just wanted to get a view, is the survey placing a greater risk to sovereign bond yields because of the states, given that fiscally, if we take out SASCI, the fiscal deficit has been contained at 2.8?
I think there is nothing more to add to what I said in the course of the presentation, because investors, since the Indian bond market has been, sovereign bond market has been open to foreign investors, they do look at the general government deficit, and whether it is 4.4 plus 2.8 or whether it is 4.4 plus 3, depending on what the actual number turns out to be for the union and the state governments, it is still on the higher side. Our long-term goal, which was enunciated in the old FRBM, was around 6%. So, and investors do take a look at this overall figure. And that is why we said, right now, I also answered in an earlier question that because of good nominal GDP growth, GSDP growth, there is no aggregate impact on the fiscal deficit numbers, but quality of expenditure may be suffering, again, in relation to what could be possible. And those expenditure are the ones that have higher multiplier effect even for employment and income generation for the very households that are being supported through unconditional cash transfers. So this is all there is to it, and I have nothing more to add to that.
142. Left side.
Good afternoon, sir. Kriti Ambe from Informist Media. This is also related to the commentary in the survey on rupee. It mentions that an undervalued rupee would not hurt at this point.
Would not what?
So, would not hurt at this point. Should that be read as a degree of policy comfort with a weaker currency? And do you have a specific level or a period of undervaluation of rupee beyond which probably the phenomenon would bring discomfort?
There is a law of diminishing marginal utility to any public commentary on the rupee beyond a point. And I think we have reached that point.
22. We'll take the last two questions after that.
Sir, I'm Shalini from ANI. Sir, my question is, as you mentioned during the presentation about the role that manufacturing units play for GDP growth, can you mention what are those subsectors?
See, as the manufacturing has been an important emphasis of recent government policies, including the National Manufacturing Mission, which aims for achieving, GDP from roughly about 12.9% to 25% in a sectoral manner, like emphasizing on sectoral issues. Also, if you see the PLI, that 14 broad sector, which has brought in 2 lakh crores of investment and 19 lakh crore of output and 12 lakh jobs. So if you see these, it is clear that these are the sectors that is on the priority list of the government. Thank you.
26.
Just to add to what
And
my
then
colleague Chanchal said, in chapter
17.
16 also in part 1, we do talk about the kind of manufacturing, which sectors we should take up first for indigenization, which can come later, which can be left to market forces, which can be actively promoted by the state, etc., given strategic considerations. That's also covered in chapter 16, part 1, in addition to chapter 10. 9. Chapter 9 is the industry chapter. And chapter 8 is industry, and chapter 16, part 1. Together, that gives you an idea about the kind of manufacturing strategy we should be pursuing.
Yes, 26.
So this is Deepak Mandal from...
Oh, your mic is not working. Yeah, it's okay.
This is Deepak Mandal from New Indian Express. So last year you had in your...
You keep it close.
Yeah, so last year in your economic survey report you had said, you had flagged the risk of over-financialization of Indian markets. This year also you said that Indian financial markets are far away from the ground reality. So what are the steps the government has taken so far, and what more it can do to address this issue?
I don't think I remember saying it in the survey, but maybe in some other public appearances. But subsequently, there have been a lot of regulatory action taken by SEBI, so there is nothing more to add to that.
17. I think this is the last question.
Good afternoon. I'm Nikunj Johri from Reuters. The survey mentioned imposing age-based access limits for use of social media, and you briefly mentioned that.
What?
Age-based access limit for social media, and you briefly mentioned in a presentation as well the example of Andhra Pradesh and Goa. So do you think the government, Indian government, should also come up with a regulation just like Australia, which currently bans use of social media for children under 16?
I have no specific idea about when or if the government of India would do so, and even in those countries it is still very early stage. They are trying to assess how effective it is, etc. But what we have heard is that the Andhra government and the Goan government are mulling these ideas. But as I said, some of these things need not necessarily only be policy driven. There is as much to do for the civil society, educational institutions, parents, and the adults themselves. Policy can help, but I think these are also issues which go beyond policy. I don't have any idea on whether Government of India is contemplating something like this.
Now this is one last question we are taking, sir. 47, last. Okay, one question. Private investment replies there.
Sir? Yeah, so go ahead.
Somebody had asked about private investment. Where are you seeing the signs of private investment coming up? We had mentioned about the CapEx survey in our chapter. There has been an increase of 66% in the CapEx allocation. That was the first ever survey. The second survey is going on. Even if you don't take the government surveys, if you look at CMI announcements, the corporate announcements that have happened, in the first half of last year, it would have been somewhere around 7 trillion, and this year it would have been 14 trillion. Another metric that you can look at is the growth in the net fixed capital assets of at least the listed companies. Compared to last year, it has gone up this year. I haven't mentioned this in the survey, but these are the ways in which you can look at how the corporate investment is picking up. Thank you.
Sir, Subhash Narayan from Mint. I just wanted to check. The survey is pitching for overhauling the RTI. That's mentioned in page 660 of your report. What is the logic? What is the rationale?
I think the logic is given in the... First of all, I wouldn't use the word overhauling. And second, the logic is what is explained in the box item.
Those are the...
That's the answer.
Okay, ask last.
Sir, I am Bani Kinkar Patnaik from the Economic Times.
Hope you are okay. Okay. Okay.
Sir, you have projected a 7% growth rate over the medium term, potential growth rate. Now, in recent years, the economic growth has been propped up by public capex. But as we know that, there is a limit to, raising public capex year by year, year after year at a, scorching pace. So now as, and we are also moving towards reduction in debt ratio and fiscal deficit.
Reduction in?
Debt ratio and the fiscal deficit. We are moving towards, reducing that further. So that makes, keeping this elevated capex thing a bit more difficult, year after year. So in your medium-term potential growth rate, have you, accounted for this, this aspect that there will be a point where keeping public capex at beyond probably 3% of GDP would be much more difficult?
Well, these are fair questions, but I think the important point to realize is that India's overall GFCF ratio to GDP is about 30%, and it's not entirely due to the public sector. Private sector capital formation may not be at the level that we saw in terms of growth rates between 2003 and 2008, but it was a different world. So that is why we are not going back to 8.5%, 9% growth that we saw in that era. So the kind of composition of growth that we have looked at, 7% is feasible with the current level of the private sector and public sector capital formation. Whether it requires in some specific years public sector to do more than 3% or less, those are things we need to calibrate based on the prevailing situation at that point. There cannot be a blanket answer to that. Yeah.
So just to add to that point, even when we had been consolidating, if you actually look into our fiscal chapter, you will see that our effective capex has only gone up as percentage of GDP. So consolidation does not mean that capex is going to come down. This has happened in the case of state governments as well. The capex is remaining intact at 2.4% despite the compression in the revenue. Thank you.
Sir, चलते चलते एक last person क्यों छूट जाए? 11.
Sir, Shiva from Times of India. In the last year's economic survey, rising corporate profitability and non-commensurate increase in wages and employment, especially at the entry level, was one of the key concerns that you had raised. So, do you see this concern still lingering in your assessment, or has the situation reversed, or what will you want to say to the corporate?
I think the data are encouraging. And the important thing is the labor codes also make it very clear that there has to be a balance in terms of the worker rights and what the employers have been asking about. So the labor code will also do its own bit to making sure that the wage growth and benefits growth is commensurate with the profitability growth. And that is an important development that has happened since we wrote the last survey.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for answering all the questions.
सीधा प्रसारण आप राजधानी दिल्ली के राष्ट्रीय मीडिया केंद्र से देख रहे थे, जहां पर जो मुख्य आर्थिक सलाहकार हैं, चीफ इकोनॉमिक एडवाइजर वी अनंत नागेश्वरन, वो अपनी टीम के साथ जो आर्थिक सर्वेक्षण आज सरकार ने जारी की है संसद में, उसके बारे में बड़ी बातें बता रहे थे। आप लगातार अपने टेलीविजन स्क्रीन पर देख भी रहे थे। उन्होंने बड़ी बातें बताई कि क्या कुछ आर्थिक सर्वेक्षण में फिलहाल के लिए आकलन है और आगे के लिए क्या कुछ देश की अर्थव्यवस्था के लिए संभावनाएं हैं। अपनी तरफ से भी जानकारी दी और संवाददाताओं के सवालों का भी उन्होंने जवाब दिया। फिलहाल इस बुलेटिन में इतना ही, लेकिन डीडी न्यूज पर खबरों और कार्यक्रमों का सिलसिला लगातार जारी है। हमें दीजिए अनुमति। नमस्कार।